Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today, helping to create a better tomorrow in many unique fronts. Today we have the opportunity to be joined by Dr. Tristin Brisbois, who is Director of the Advanced Personalization Ideation Center in the Life Sciences Global R&D Group at PepsiCo, where she's involved in delivering actionable, personalized nutrition solutions to help promote the health and wellness of their consumers. She recently also held the role of Director of Platform and Academic Partnerships, where she was involved in developing Pepsi's internal capabilities in areas like personalized nutrition, as well as identifying and forming important partnerships with leading academic institutions and external vendors in this developing space. Dr. Brisbois previously did that, served as Senior Principal Scientist for Global R&D Nutrition Sciences. There she was involved in advancing the translation of nutrition science in key areas, directing and guiding regional product innovation, brand communications for PepsiCo North American beverages. She also provided expert input and support on external stakeholder issues. She oversaw PepsiCo North American Nutrition Communication Outreach Program and Strategy. Prior to Pepsi, Dr. Brisbois was the Manager of Nutrition and Scientific Affairs at the Canadian Sugar Institute, where she led that organization's Nutrition Communications Program. Dr. Brisbois completed both her bachelor's and PhD in Nutrition and Food Sciences at the University of Alberta. Her PhD, interestingly enough, investigated food intake behaviors in cancer with a focus on appetite stimulation and improvement of taste and smell perception using marijuana therapy. She also studied appetite and reward-related pathways in healthy and diseased populations, exploring various mechanisms that either led to cancer or deficit of calories in the case of different pathologies. In addition to all that, she also has her master's in business and science from Global Food and Technology Innovation from Rutgers University. Go Scarlet Knights, yay. A lot of exciting things to be talking about today. We're glad to have her. Dr. Tristin Brisbois, thank you so much for taking the time to come on our show.
Thank you for having me. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be a great discussion, a lot of interesting things to discuss. I'd like to start off, though, like we typically do, Tristin, by handing you the floor just for a little bit to further introduce yourself. I read through your fascinating bio at Pepsi, but can you take us back to sort of the early days? Introduce yourself a little bit about where you grew up, how you got interested in science, but also, of course, food science and nutrition. I think that would be a great way to lay the groundwork for what we're going to be getting into.
Sure. So, I guess right from a kid. So I grew up in Western Canada. So it was actually back in Alberta, which makes sense, the school out there. Had some great parents with some great advice. My his main message to me was always pick a career that you really enjoy. He worked for the government for many years, not to say that government is not a very fun career, but wanted to make sure that I enjoyed what I did. And then my mom, she was a big advocate on being a student for life. So, those two pieces of advice kind of really helped, I guess, maybe mold and shape the career trajectory. And, for me, I always wanted to have a job and careers in areas that continuously challenge and interest me. And so I've had a lot of different, you kind of read through the formal bio, but even as an early age, like, got into everything from road construction to waitressing to, tutoring, reffing, soccer, like everything across the gamut. And for me, it was really important to be able to always understand all people's point of view. So you meet a lot of interesting people, the more diverse that you get into different fields. And then also, it kind of helps to build your skill set. And so, you force yourself to kind of get into these different areas, learn about it. And then it's amazing how much you can connect the dots afterwards. And so, for me, when I was in academics, and you're rightfully so, I studied medicinal marijuana before it was cool. So started my PhD in that space, and, very proud of the outcome of that. Obviously the placebo-controlled clinical trial that we had did influence Health Canada's decision to, make sure that medicinal marijuana was recognized as a therapy. So that was a fantastic outcome. But when I was in academics, I knew I didn't want to stay there, and it comes back to this constantly, wanting to see all sides and that breadth of learning. And so, for me, decided to go to a trade association first, and I'd like to say that was a choice, but really, when you're coming out academics, you apply for everything under the sun, and then you just hope that you land somewhere that's interesting. And so, that was my first career, moved me across the country to Toronto. Great time there, learned a lot. It was a fantastic entrance job because in Canada, it's a little bit different than the US. So you're very much in where you have sort of all policymakers at the table. So, you have your scientists in the nutrition realm. That doesn't matter where they're from. So they can be from industry, trade associations, academic partners alike. And I really feel that, like Health Canada does a really good job of taking all those points of view and then coming up with the best policy possible. I mean, I really do empathize with policymakers. I think they got a tough job ahead of them. But, it was interesting to see how that all worked and came together. And then from there, I got recruited to PepsiCo and, started with the Canadian business, worked a lot on the beverage side with our Gatorade Sports Science Institute, and was sort of, the lead there for Canada, sweat testing our athletes, that kind of thing. It was fantastic work, still work with that team a lot. And then, came down to the US. I guess it's been 6.5 years now. So from Toronto to New York, and New York's a great city. It's a lot of fun. PepsiCo does a great job of keeping talent interested in into the interesting areas. So, I've the last, I guess it'd be last 4 years, when Antonio Tatarani joined from Life Sciences to build out that capability. I've been working with him right from the beginning, and we've been looking at emerging science and technologies with the team, and personalized nutrition is one of them. So that's how went from the platform role into this very exciting space of personalized nutrition. So that's where we ended up.
Awesome, really awesome. And when I look at the PepsiCo Life Sciences R&D group, you have a very broad purview in the sense interpretation, communication, translation, nutrition, sports science, and all the connectivity to physiology, diet, health. There's a group of organizations that you sort of encompass now. The Gatorade Sports Science Group, we had Dr. Carter on the show several months ago talking about their initiatives, but also health and nutrition science team, an external innovation policy and academic partnerships team, which I mentioned a little bit in the intro, and then clinical operations. Could you give us a little sort of top line overview of the Pepsi R&D Life Science organization? I mean, I love hearing about novel groups like this within, I think Pepsi is a food company, but here's an amazing suite of life sciences capabilities, and a little bit about where directives come from. I mean, I'm much more familiar with the pharma industry, but does the Tropicana team say, hey, I'm interested in these interesting nutrition properties of orange juice, and PepsiCo R&D team find these out for me? How does it all work? Where does it all come from?
No, great question. So a life sciences organization, it's about 130 strong across the globe. And like I said, it's kind of, the company has made a concerted effort to beef up that part of the organization in recent years. But that's not to say that we haven't been on that journey for quite some time. So the nutrition science team, for instance, which is one of the key pillars within the life sciences organization, head up by Marianne O'Shea, that team has been in operation for a few decades now, and that's actually where I started my career within PepsiCo, was with that nutrition science team. And then, as you point out, James Carter leading up the GSSI, so the exercise physiologists, mainly based in the US, but there are some on a global scale as well. And then our external innovation team, which is a really interesting and fun addition, because, especially for my group, where we work a lot with external partners, external vendors, it's great to be able to have a team with expertise in that space to help vet, and also just to help highlight, interesting partners that we might want to engage with. And so, it's definitely evolved over the time. I'd say Antonio Tatarani, so he is my boss. Maybe an interesting interview for you at some point. He actually did come from the pharma industry, but first started his career at the NIH for 10 years there, 10 years in pharma, and then came over to PepsiCo. And that's really with that remit to help, develop out this capability and start to see, really pushed us in an area, and I love this space, is looking more of not being just like a really good partner to our marketing team and our business partners, which we are, right? And so it is a little bit of that push-pull. And so marketing would come to us and say, hey, what can I say about this product, kind of thing, making sure that they're legitimate in what they're saying. And also on the flip side, looking at, okay, scoping new ingredients, for instance, here's some really interesting space, looking at the different technologies and science and saying, here's some white space opportunities. And so we were kind of doing that all, as a group in different ways, but not really in a concerted effort. And so, the academic platform role that I had, we launched an R&D innovation dossier is what we're calling them. So there is really to identify where is that white space opportunities where there's really good scientific underpinnings. So what are the scientific trends and big macro trends, and where do they meet and intersect with consumer insights? And that's where like those white space opportunities and market opportunities could be. And so, we started to formalize kind of that process a bit. And one thing that continued to come up was personalized nutrition, and hence the, the eventual evolution of my role into being able to launch the Advanced Personalization Ideation Center and build that up and start looking at how do we build that capability for PepsiCo as, consumers start thinking more about personalized options and also just, wanting to improve their overall wellness. And obviously COVID greatly accelerated that on all fronts. And so, it's been very interesting ride, I guess. Almost feels a little bit serendipitous, even from, from the background to get to here. But I mean, it's such an interesting dynamic space, and being able to pull in all these different partners from both the technology and academic side has been just fantastic, and really, really enjoying the journey so far.
Excellent. Excellent. And then, one other thing before we get into some of the different projects, I noticed that just a little bit ago, I think you attended the Food as Medicine Summit. And you were on this panel discussing sort of the opportunities for the food and beverage industry to sort of engage in this whole concept of food as medicine. It's such a, I wanted to sort of, in addition to sort of the Pepsi R&D organization, I wanted to sort of get your view on where we are in 2022, in the sense that, I think back, and if you and I went in a time machine, we went back, say, 20 years, we would see pharma companies making drugs and food companies making delicious food and nutrition companies doing their thing with supplements and whatnot. And now everyone's doing every other one's other business. We got pharma companies that are making things that don't look like pharma products. We got medical foods and everything in between. Where are we in 2022 with this concept of food as medicine? And where, in answer to sort of your panel, what kind of conclusions did you come to in general from the discussion of where the food and beverage industry sits in that equation nowadays in 2022?
Yes. So I mean, I can answer your question around food as medicine in terms of the outcome of the panel. So I don't know if you've flown recently, but my flight was canceled. And so I was going to have to take that from an airport, that panel. And that probably wasn't the best decision. But, yes, we've been involved in this concept of food as medicine, both through our consortia with Tufts, but then also, and Antonio has been a speaker in these different panels as well. And, it's interesting because consumers are definitely looking for more from their food. Right? Food and beverages. So they're looking for it to be more than just nourishment. It's like nourishment and. So what's that functional angle to that? And it's, we kind of been looking at this is kind of like an east to west thing, where you're looking at, in other parts of the world that it's always been that way, that food is medicine in other parts of the world. And so is it something that now, North America, Western society is just kind of catching up to potentially? It presents an interesting opportunity for big companies because, for PepsiCo, for instance, I mean, we're definitely on this spectrum, right? So we have very indulgent products within our portfolio, unapologetically. Those have great, rewarding benefits to them. It's food is supposed to be enjoying. We're able to do that all the way through to very nutritious offerings. And so where on that spectrum are we going to play? And, I'd say the food as medicine movement in that functional food space is something that's, we're never going to be a medical food company, but can we, sort of move the needle a little bit more towards that functional food space? And I was talking about ingredient scoping and, different clinical work in that space. I think that that's where you're going to start to see, a lot of movement in that area. And you see big food companies kind of getting into that space if the regulatory environment will allow it, right? And so it's a little bit where technologies they're almost exceeding how regulations are going forward. I mean, personalized nutrition is a great example of that, where, regulations need to catch up. And so is there going to be a way of being able to, help support and nurture innovation in a way that's still safe for the consumer and not misleading at all? And so I think that that's going to be a real big challenge going forward, but one that, certainly PepsiCo is willing to embrace.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about some of the projects, and I think I'd love to start off with this fascinating program called the GX Sweat Patch, which is defined in the materials as this breakthrough ecosystem that collects real-time sweat data to advise consumers on hydration status, nutrition status, recommendations for recovery. We're at a fascinating time where these wearables are far beyond, hey, what's my pulse? Can you talk a little bit about, because I know this is now connected through your work with the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, but if you could sort of take us into the history of this, how wearable was decided, how sweat is a wonderful bioresource of different biomarkers, all about health and fitness. But take us a little through the background story here and how you came to this fascinating new project.
Sure. So you said you had talked to Dr. James Carter, so he leads up this team, and so he could probably give you a much better and fuller explanation. But I mean, even as a company, hydration is a massive unlock, right? And so it's sort of, how do you democratize the ability to have almost a sports scientist or someone what they call a sports scientist in your pocket? So how can you help a general consumer or a weekend warrior, whatever it might be, to help assess how much fluid as well as sodium that they've lost during their exercise or performance or whatever it might be to recover properly and make sure that they're properly hydrated going in? Because hydration is it's very interesting. So it's not just, for physical performance, but also mental performance, which is really important for those, like hockey, for instance. As a Canadian, I'm going to speak to hockey, but, a lot of other sports where you need that kind of, quick decision making, which is also relevant in the workforce as well. So, the team, this was not a small or short endeavor. So they underwent 11 clinical trials. This was over the course of 5 years. It was definitely an initial push from the marketing and the business team to be able to say, how do we expand what GSSI does, the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, how do we expand what they do to others? Anybody can go and purchase this sweat patch right now. And so, that was the hope in behind it. Like I said, great team that did some great validation work in this, making sure that the wearable is actually measuring what it is, because there's a lot of stuff in the markets right now, which is questionable if the outcomes is actually legitimate or not. But the team did a fantastic job in that space. And, it's just the beginning, right? And starting out with personalized nutrition with an athlete or personalized hydration just makes sense. I mean, they're early adopters. They want to improve their performance. And so, how, and what's the remit of my team is like, how do you then expand that even further to the general population? And so what does that look like? And what do those wearables and sensors look like for the general population?
Excellent. And just one thing I neglected to mention at the beginning is that in addition to your many responsibilities, you're also on the advisory committee, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, the Institute of Genomic Biology and Personalized Nutrition initiative there, doing all sorts of outreach and so forth. And looking through this material, in addition to sort of the wearables and the AI and that stuff, this theme that we've touched on a teeny bit in the past of nutrigenomics pops up. And I'm just interested in getting sort of your feedback on where we are in this particular area, because I know this is one that's been sort of evolving over time, a little different than sort of pharmacogenomics, but really sort of this whole concept of, as we think of the patch, and we have an understanding of sweat and hydration and so forth, but the recommendations that recovery can be obviously drink more water or get more electrolytes, what have you, but this vision of, hey, eat more of X, less of Y, and so forth and so on, to match our genetics, our epigenetics, which is becoming a part of the equation. Where are we in 2022 with regard to things like nutrigenomics and personalization of the input side of things?
Yeah, it's interesting because like the science of all the omics, so whether it's the nutrigenetics, the microbiome, a metabolomics, as you say, like there's just all the omics. It's just absolutely exploded over recent years, right? So I think, one general takeaway from that is that, there's the science is continuously pointing to, it's not a one size fits all approach. So what works for me may not work for you. And so now how and what is the best diagnostic tool? So what is the best, screening tool, patch, wearable, whatever it might be, to help differentiate what's going to be the best food or beverage for you, or diet program, or whatever it might be. And, we're a long ways off of that. So, because there is so much areas, and right now you look at the personalized nutrition field, it's very fragmented because companies are looking at, one area, which is true. So genetics plays a role, but so does the microbiome. How do those interact? And then, blood glucose control. Yep, that also plays a role, but how important is that to the general population? Is metabolic flexibility more important? So then what is a metabolome doing, right? So it's just like this, this constant kind of evolution, and which is really interesting to see. But I do think that in order for this field to absolutely take off, there's going to have to be some consolidation of, whether that becomes, sharing of data or transparency with data sets to be able to have more of a 360 point of view of a consumer without having them fill out, wear 80 wearables and fill out, 120-page questionnaire. So how do you be able to have the systems that are already in place work together in a way that then adds value to the consumer without putting them in jeopardy of, we obviously don't want to get into the space where, data is being shared unruly or without the consent of the consumer. So it'll be a really interesting space. And you mentioned the consortia, University of Illinois, like that's an area that we're looking at in a pre-competitive space with, academics, big industry, small industry, as well as, eventually regulators, to have that discussion of how are we going to ensure that, data is protected, but then also making sure that, how do we actually accelerate this field in a way that makes sense and is actually going to bring the best value back to the consumer at the lower cost too, right? So because a lot of the stuff is they can get pretty pricey with these kits and whatnot in that space. So a little convoluted. I didn't answer your question exactly, but it's evolving. And I think, one last thing I'd say is that the NIH with their, I think it was a couple of years ago, right, with their nutrition strategy with precision nutrition right at the core. I mean, you started to see a lot of these different precision nutrition or personalized nutrition centers popping up in different academic institutions. It'll be really interesting to see what they put forward and what starts to stick in that space. So, it's been great working with those teams as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was, as I was saying, when I was looking through sort of the research plan there, once again, it was very broad, and it was nice to see, all of these different interests in these different groups coming together and putting something that had sort of all the components that one needs to look at when one thinks of a personalized nutrigenomics and the stuff that was promised in the past, but is finally coming to fruition. So it's nice to see you involved with an initiative like that. Moving from the elite athlete to the non-elite athlete, I came across also this, and now you're published here with Dr. Carter, and this is through GSSI, but it was a paper entitled Application of Sports Nutrition and Healthy Aging, Eat Like an Athlete, Insight to Sports Nutrition Science to Support Active Aging and Healthy Older Adults. Aging and healthy longevity and health span has been an extremely hot topic for us. In this paper, you outline some, we think that maybe healthy longevity is much more complicated than it is, but you outline some very common sense, short-term things that we should be thinking about in terms of maintaining skeletal muscle mass, in terms of the way exercise may enhance cognitive function and so forth, the importance of protein. Talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing in the area of healthy aging, if you would.
Sure. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, aging is something that we can't ignore. I guess if you've been living under a rock for the past, 10 years kind of thing, that, you notice that there's aging population globally. And it's alarming about it is that people are living longer, but not necessarily healthier. And so we're going to get to a point where it will absolutely cripple healthcare systems if something isn't done to be able to get to a preventative space. And so, that is definitely a focus of our team, and how do you start, you highlighted, and that's very nicely done, is that there are some simple ways that you can, adopt different behavior changes or different lifestyle changes that will make a big difference over time. It's just a matter of highlighting what would work for that individual over another, or getting them to test, almost like test and learn, right, in that space, and helping guide that journey. And so, that paper in particular, we did focus on muscle function, and because a lot as you age, muscles just aren't as, testosterone's not as much for males. Females tend to not be as strong just to begin with. A lot of times you have this almost like sarcopenic obesity, which means that people are actually, wasting from the inside. It's almost like a 90-pound person in a sumo suit. That's very challenging then to be able to move around. And once you lose that function, right, that physical function, your quality of life and your ability and your independence goes downhill very fast. And so, to be able to help people maintain their physical fitness is, that would be a fantastic place to start. And it also helps, improve sleep and et cetera, et cetera. And so, with that, it was really just looking at what are some of the commonalities that we're seeing with athletes and other populations. And again, coming back to my earlier work with advanced cancer patients who also suffer from cancer cachexia. So again, the wasting of muscles, very similar, right? It's just accelerated in those groups in comparison to an aging population, but the result is the same. So, it was really just looking at what are some of the pragmatic approaches that we could adopt. And most of it is just really simple one, just spreading the protein out throughout the day. Right. So a lot of times, people get up and just have tea and toast or coffee and toast. It's like, well, there's not necessarily any protein in that. Could you add, whether it is, a shake or something in that space, or could you have, a whey protein supplement or whatever it might be, something to be able to increase that overall protein intake. So it's not just all backloaded at dinner time, because as you age, your stomach also shrinks too. And so you're not able, to consume as much. Your appetite goes down, your taste and smell changes, there's a lot of things working against you, I guess, in this area. So, there's just, I think that, what we're trying to do now is really looking at how do you help and early intervention, but across the whole space. But how do you help people extend their health span through ways that are very simple, that can then build up to big changes over time? So that's the focus. And it all comes down to behavior change, right? If it's too much all at once, nobody's going to do it, and it's just your whole program goes down the tube. So it's one of those things that we're definitely working on. And the last thing I'd say is that, how do you make it enjoyable too, right? Because nobody wants to hear that you have to eat this and have to eat that. We all know that the carrot works better than the stick. So, how do you bring that into whatever programming or diagnostic tools or whatever it might be to help that engagement and stickiness? And so, that's where the team is focused for sure. And it fits in with PepsiCo culture. So that works out.
Awesome. Excellent. Really excellent. And staying on your PhD thesis for a moment, because I had the opportunity to download it, and everyone listening and watching, you should go download Dr. Brisbois' PhD thesis. It's really awesome. It's entitled Food Intake Behavior in Advanced Cancer, Implications of Taste and Smell Alterations or Sensory Reward and Cannabinoid Therapy. And the really cool thing here, aside from the fact that it's just a cool story, but things like taste and smell, or organoleptics, whatever the fancy terminology is, obviously very important. As you were saying, if things don't taste good, things don't smell good, people aren't going to eat or drink them. However, there is this whole other area that you touch on this in your thesis, but it's been getting more attention lately, especially we think of things like smell and how we're learning. We don't just smell like 5 odors; we can smell millions of different things potentially, and small variations. Something that smells good to you smells bad to me, and all that. I was just interested in thinking back to the work you did on your PhD. Therapeutic or nutra applications of taste and smell beyond just yummy and smelling good. Any interesting research there, whether you're working on it at Pepsi or just things that interest you in the scientific literature, whether that's I smell this, I want to eat less, I smell that, I burn off more calories, whatever it may be, maybe somewhat connected to aromatherapy, I don't know, but anything there that's interesting to you that you might want to mention?
Yeah, so the olfactory system is very, very complex. Yeah. It's amazing to me that how much is advanced even after, I've graduated in that space, or, published that thesis years and years ago. So you're making me go back far, but that's great. I appreciate it. But I think there's some really interesting areas that for me, it was something that came to mind, especially in COVID, when people start to lose their taste and smell as one of the side effects. That is very alarming because knowing how complex your olfactory system in particular is, and it's so tightly linked to memory. And so because it sits at the front, like the prefrontal cortex, right? It's that connection there that to me, it'll be very interesting to see over time how all this plays out and evolves, and what are the longer term side effects and whatever it might be. But anyway, so what's interesting about the memory space is that, can you, because the smell of something can trigger a memory for something else, can you then start to potentially, I haven't seen this necessarily in the area of eating necessarily, but more around stress management, definitely in complementary therapy. We looked at that with palliative care in patients. So yeah, I think that there's huge potential in that area. In terms of, other spaces that around more flavors, I guess, I don't know if you put capsaicin in that space, but the trigeminal nerve is really interesting too, in terms of, stimulation of that. And can that be, a linking to a reduced food intake overall? So some definitely interesting potential in those areas. So for folks if you eat a spicy food, you generally feel a little bit fuller after doing that. Is that because the peppers, the capsaicin within the food that then makes you feel full? Whether or not there's an increase in calories is sort of not the case. And so yeah, there's some interesting spaces for sure with taste and smell. And I think that those few areas for me are really interesting to see how that will progress as we go forward.
Awesome. Tristin, one of the the areas that I mentioned that you're involved in is the outreach and the external innovation connection. I was reading about this program that you were involved in between PepsiCo and the Yale Center for Customer Insights, where you created competitions, basically business students and so forth are able to submit ideas in terms of the creation of new apps and new innovative ways to help motivate consumers to do some of the things that we're talking about here today in terms of engaging in health behaviors. Talk a little bit about some of this outreach, because I really think it's, it's always fascinating to hear a company like Pepsi with the scale and capabilities also doing this outreach and this connection at the earlier stages of people's careers in the business schools and so forth in the universities to get some of these new ideas flowing.
Sure. So the Yale competition, I mean, it's fantastic. It's a great group to work with, have had great success for the 2 years that we've run it. So basically, it's almost like crowdsourcing for a specific question that we have. And so when we first started out, so the first year was, our inaugural year with the API, so it was just last year, where, we had some ideas of what we were going to do, but they weren't exactly completely vetted, that kind of thing. So we needed some help in terms of the shaping of this. Like, how can you, and it comes back to that whole, how do you make wellness fun?
Mm-hmm.
That is a challenge, right? Like, so what does that look like? And so that was the premise of the competition, just to see, what others, students in particular, they're thinking about, they're obviously, very digitally advanced. And so for a digital application or solution, that helps that they're already in that space. Helped us to think more outside of our realm. I apologize to anybody who works for an agency, but I'm generally underwhelmed by agency work in general. It's sort of, the investment for that may or may not come back with the best results. And so this is a way to really be able to get some really off the wall creative things. So they have nothing to lose. Like, why not? Like, why not put together some, crazy ideas that we might want to pull from? And it's not like we were looking for the absolute perfect app altogether, but it was more of almost creating like a bit of a Frankenstein of there's a great idea from here, there's a great idea from this team, how do we then mature our thinking in that space? And then, it's also then what was helpful with it is almost like a pitch deck for them. And so then for us, we had senior leaders involved, myself, Antonio, the CMO or previous CMO for Spotify was part of the judging panel. And so we were also able to give them feedback on, hey, this was really well done. This one wasn't. Have you thought more about this? And so from the student's perspective, it's a great learning experience. Like, if they want to get into, startup companies, that kind of thing, this was like an entrance level into that, right? And getting that feedback of what worked and what didn't. And then it just furthers our partnership with Yale too. I mean, we worked with that great university in this area as a company for quite some time. And so it was just a neat way to be able to advance that partnership in a kind of a different and engaging way.
And can you tell about I know there were some announcements recently about some of the winners. Can you mention some of the apps that
looked at? Yeah. So some of them were like, they used TikTok. So it was like a fit talker in that space, which is, yeah, that makes sense. Like, why not do that in that area? There was some others that were more around using like geocaching. So, because as we're thinking about things, the one way of bringing wellness to be fun, it's almost like disguising it in some way, right? So having people do things that they don't realize, like, the Pokemon Go, people were increasing their step count unintentionally, kind of thing, which actually got them to be fitter in a way that, wasn't intended. So there's those kinds of, ideas that came forward, which were really great. But yeah, I mean, it was just fantastic participation from, all across the U.S. Very different winners this year from last year. I mean, we had a lot of more Eastern schools last year, and this year we had a lot more from the West Coast. So it was good. It's good to see it coast to coast and different stuff coming forward.
Cool. Tristin, what is coming up for the rest of 2022? I mean, I know that you've been aside from everything that's going on in-house, you have the competitions, obviously you're advising the group at the University of Illinois. You missed the flight to to the Food as Medicine Summit, but nonetheless, you participated. Where else can we see you, meet you, hear about things that are going on, and any other initiatives that I might have missed that you might want to mention? Please take the floor.
Sure. So yeah, I also co-chair the Personalized Nutrition Committee for Tufts, cool. And so under their Dariush Mazafari and his group there under food innovation. food and innovation. So that's been great. I mean, we hope to have some deliverables out of there pretty soon. Just from that work has just been, it's been really interesting. I actually did not realize that Boston was such a mecca for food startup companies. Like I didn't realize that it's kind of like the Silicon Valley for food startups. So it was great to be able to, meet these different folks and whatnot. And so, more recently we'll be a mentor for it's I guess it'll be a company that's starting up, that is sponsored by the Saudi Arabian government to help in sustainability areas. And so, once that becomes more renowned, can definitely, make sure that you're aware and share that out. Just most of it too is just to continue. I mean, we have 4 pilots on the go right now with the API Center. So again, our Advanced Personalization and Ideation Center, and different pilots around the globe. And that's really to see, what is the potential for some of these areas and what's the market opportunity. So, the way that we work is very much in a test and learn in environment. And so, we want to make sure that whatever we're testing actually lands properly. And so, there might be some commercial spin outs out of that, I guess, which we would love to come back and talk to you more about when when we have those on the go. So that might be one area, but yeah, I don't think I have anything formalized on the calendar. Might try and get out to Fancy, ECSS, the European Congress of Sports Science, and out in Europe would be great. I mean, it doesn't hurt that it's in Seville, Spain. So, in that space, but I mean, also just welcome anybody on LinkedIn to, shoot me a note. Love to have a chat with you. Can learn more about what we do and also what you guys do. So, thanks very much.
Awesome. So, yeah, and we will put links to all of that, so people can find you and reach out. One last question. I once again, I neglected in the intro to mention that you're an accomplished athlete. You played collegiate soccer. You currently play softball, soccer, football. You run a lot. What do you do to relax when you're not doing all of this Pepsi stuff and when you're not running marathons and playing all sorts of sports?
Well, let's be honest. I run so I can drink beer. so
I like that.
Now, a lot of camping, especially, coming back to the roots in Western Canada, there's a lot of camping, a lot of hiking, that kind of stuff, somewhere where you can turn off the cell phone and get no cell service. So, that's always a good way to unwind. But yeah, and then on the other end of the hustle and bustle in New York, I mean, the city's back. So it's been great to, live music and any of that. The shows are back. It's just phenomenal. So try and keep a balance for sure. But I definitely don't take myself too seriously.
No, that's good advice. Really good advice. Tristin, it's a fascinating set of programs and outreach initiatives you have going on. I'd love to do a follow-up with you later on, but really, really fascinating work. And wishing you the best with all of it as you continue to create this unique ecosystem. For everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode across our podcast networks or watching on the YouTube, again, you've been listening to Dr. Tristin Brisbois, Director, Advanced Personalization Ideation Center, Life Sciences Global R&D at PepsiCo. Tristin, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while about everything you have going on. Obviously, thanks for all you're doing to share this knowledge with us. And as we say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people via the work you're doing. Really very fascinating work, and all the best for it.
Well, thank you very much. It was fun and such a privilege to be part of it. So thank you.
We'll see you again soon.